Who are you?
The last thing you're ever going to see is a Stark smiling down at you as you die.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. George R. R. Martin just teased that he was working on a new Game of Thrones project with Maisie Williams, Arya Stark herself, and it sounds like it's the long-spoken of Arya sequel that they talked about right after the original series ended several years ago. So we'll break it all down. There are a couple other big announcements this week, too. Like, that was just part of the big announcements. There's a brand new Knight of the Seven Kingdoms trailer that they're getting ready to release. They officially announced the Game of Thrones movie is in development. I've already done a video about that. I'll post a link at the end of this. And they're also making a production just focused solely on the story of the tourney at Harrenhal with Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark. So if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get videos of everything. I'll be doing episode videos for Knight of the Seven Kingdoms next year because House of the Dragon Season 3 won't premiere until 2026, so Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is like our next big Game of Thrones series. But during George R. R. Martin's recent blog post, as of me posting this video, he made a couple of announcements, notably the Tourney at Harrenhal production and developing the special project, quote-unquote, with Maisie Williams that sounds like he was really excited about and wanted to do for a long time. So this is his actual quote about that. We also got together with Maisie Williams for pizza and pasta and talked about ... Well, no, better not get into that. We don't want to jinx it, but it could be so much fun.
Then I'll just go back and play Arya Stark, so everyone will win at some point. Why can't we get a series starring Maisie Williams as Arya Dread Pirate Stark, as she searches for new land, runs a crew, looks for buried treasure, saves those who need to be saved?
The reason why everyone thinks this is the Arya Stark sequel series that's been rumored since the original series ended is because it was one of the strongest contenders for the next series when the original Game of Thrones ended in 2019. Of all the billions of sequel and prequel ideas that HBO had, the Arya Stark ending from that original Game of Thrones Season 8 had the most sequel energy to it. She was heading off to sail west of Westeros and have totally new adventures.
I'm not going back north.
Where are you going?
What's west of Westeros? No one knows. It's where all the maps stop.
So obviously the follow-up question is, what were those adventures? Whereas all the other main characters were going back to their homes, like Sansa had convinced new King Bran Stark to let her cede the north of the Seven Kingdoms and name herself Queen of the North like the ancient kings of winter before Aegon's conquest. Bran Stark had just become the most boring king in the history of Westeros. The whole reason why they picked him was because a king who knew everyone's secrets and knew everything would best be able to keep the peace. So everyone was basically voting him in, knowing that he was the boring choice because they didn't want any more drama between the different realms or great houses. That is like the opposite of an interesting sequel pitch. Bran became king and then nothing interesting or crazy ever happened ever again. In Jon Snow, even though Kit Harington, we learned, tried to get his sequel series going the last couple of years, also headed north of the Wall to live with the wildlings, and sounded like not a whole lot was going on up there on a very universe-ending scale like you would normally expect for a big Jon Snow sequel series, which was part of the problem, according to Kit Harington. From what he said, George R. R. Martin wasn't helping them develop the story, and they just could not come up with an interesting or compelling enough idea that would merit a big enough show that would feel like an honorable successor to the original Game of Thrones series. I'm sure there are at least a couple people out there that would love to see Jon Snow just shuffling around brooding in the north, not really doing anything for 8 to 10 episodes, but in reality, that's not like a really compelling show. Jon Snow reading the Weirwood phone book with Bran Stark for 10 episodes. The whole beauty of an Arya Stark sequel is that she's going to a totally unexplored western continent in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin was very clear about that. Like, nobody has gone to the western continent and survived to come back and tell everyone what is on that continent. There are a lot of people that have sailed there and never come back. Presumably, a lot of them that survived just never did come back. We'll get into that in a second, too, because there are a couple canonical references to the Western continent throughout A Song of Ice and Fire that they can also use for some interesting scenarios for the Arya Stark sequel series. But the idea is that nothing from the Western continent has any real bearing on the original main story, for example. That's the important thing. There's no real chance of any of her future story ruining or somehow diminishing the original story. And unlike the problem you run into with prequels, like we have right now with House of the Dragon, because Arya would be a totally new story, none of the book readers or people who watched the original show would have any idea of what's going on. The original series wouldn't potentially spoil any of her future story. The actual place where Arya is sailing during Game of Thrones Season 8 ending here is she's departing from Blackwater Bay at King's Landing, but her ship is sailing around the southern edge of Westeros and then due west through the Sunset Sea to the western continent. That's this area here, the entire Sunset Sea on the edge of Westeros.
Obviously, House of the Dragon came back, and I think, like a lot of people, I was like, finally now feel like I have, like, perspective on it. I can't believe that they did that.
Within the original Song of Ice and Fire novels, there are rumors from sailors, the Ironborn, that the northern part of this Sunset Sea is filled with krakens, leviathans, and sea dragons. They briefly got into this in the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones during Season 3 when Daenerys' dragons had grown a little larger and basically started going fishing in the Eastern Sea, diving below the waves. So if you wondered, regular dragons can dive below the water at least briefly. It is totally possible that there is a subspecies of dragon that rose up at some point in history and started living entirely in the water, like some offshoot of regular dragons. There's all kinds of references to krakens and leviathans from different sailors across history in the novels. George R. R. Martin is always kind of ambiguous about the way he makes it seem like you never know if they're just old sailors, tall tales, trying to scare people, passing into legend, or if they're legit. They're actually currently still developing the Sea Snakes 9 Voyages TV series as a prequel, but now as an animated show. That would be the series where they get into a lot of those aspects of the lore, the sea-based lore. I do believe the stories are at least somewhat true, though. If dragons exist, and they're like a totally normal thing, then of course other large creatures probably exist across the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Within the Ironborn lore of the books, the Sea Stone Chair, the throne that they use as the high seat of House Greyjoy since Aegon's conquest, was actually created by the people from the western continent where Arya is sailing. And there's a big connection to Arya and Jon Snow's historical family in House Stark. During the books, Bran Stark tells the story of Brynden the Shipwright to Meera and Jojen Reed. He was one of the ancient Stark kings of winter before Aegon's conquest, who sailed west of Westeros with a fleet of ships just like Arya is doing right now, but he was never heard from again. His son Brynden the Burner was named so because he burned the shipyards after his father, the king, didn't come home in grief. But that doesn't mean that Brynden the Shipwright actually died. He was just never seen from again by anyone from Westeros. Those of you now also asking like the follow-up question, was he just another version of Bran Stark warging into someone from the distant past trying to find out what was west of Westeros? We actually started seeing this question in Game of Thrones Season 6 of the original show after he became the Three-Eyed Raven and accidentally turned Hodor into Hodor when he started controlling him from the past, from the present, connecting past and future Hodor briefly, scrambling his brains. There are a lot of people at the time, right after that, who wondered if Bran Stark Three-Eyed Raven had done something similar in the distant past after the first Long Night, and he might just be the real Brandon the Builder, Bran Stark, who created House Stark. Like, Brandon the Builder is the person who started the House Stark family. He's the one who built the wall with the Children of the Forest laying their enchantments on it so that the White Walkers in the Night King couldn't pass south of it.
Well, funny you should ask. Let me get my map.
Like a lot of big theories in Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin never really talks definitively about any of this, but I don't think this is the case. Like, I don't think that Bran Stark is all the different Bran Starks from across history. Just because the Bloodraven version of the Three-Eyed Raven would have known that Bran Stark would have done something like this and stopped him from totally messing with the timeline by doing too much in the past. Like the Hodor accident was meant to be his only real big accident, and after that he started to figure out his powers so that he did not do that again in the future. So it wasn't like then he started going back into the past more and more and more and messing with more people across history. You also have to remember that a lot of those theories are born on the TV show, and in those later seasons, the TV show departed vastly from the books because there was no book material, and George R. R. Martin was not writing in the writer's room with them on all that stuff, so they just created that stuff on their own. So generally, I wouldn't look at the later seasons of Game of Thrones as being that canonical to the actual books. Like, George R. R. Martin's book story will be a little bit different, if not very different. But now, because Brandon the Shipwright and his fleet being lost over west of Westeros, it's possible in the future that Arya Stark in the future can run into distant Stark relatives descended from those group of people who got stranded on the western continent. Rhaenys Targaryen, one of Aegon's sister wives, was going to fly her dragon Meraxes across the Western Sea to see what was on that western continent after the conquest, but she was killed during the First Dornish War before she could do it. And Alyssa Farman, who was the secret lover of Rhaena Targaryen, daughter of Aenys and granddaughter of Aegon the Conqueror, sailed west to Westeros to eventually never be seen again either. So this is kind of a running theme with people who do make it to the Western continent. They're usually never seen again, but the idea is that most of the people who do make it are the ones just looking for adventure. They're not looking to secure a trade route and then come right back. Typically, they sail west of Westeros, intending to never return. There's also a big connection to this area with House of the Dragon in the part of the timeline where we're at right now, heading into House of the Dragon Season 3. At this point in history, the current reigning Lord of House Greyjoy is Dalton Greyjoy, known as the Red Kraken. We'll probably see him during Season 3, Season 4. He ruled a large portion of this Sunset Sea, this area here, west of Westeros. But the only other thing that's known about that area that's talked about in the books is that closer to the Westeros western border in the Sunset Sea, there are a bunch of smaller uninhabited islands. So the good thing here is that theoretically, this would be much easier for HBO's writers to do totally new material for Arya set forward in the timeline on this western continent without it affecting any of the other story in any other part of the timeline. And because of these people from Westeros, also people that she's related to, like House Stark people who got lost over there, there are canonical excuses to explain how she runs into familiar houses or descendants of those Westerosi houses. Now, for those of you asking if Bran Stark's three-eyed raven powers work on the Western continent or on the Eastern continent for that matter, it would be funny, like if the Game of Thrones original finale, she says, "I'm going west to Westeros," and Bran Stark just keeps his mouth shut, not telling her what's west to Westeros. But I actually think no, his powers do not extend to the Western continent, for example. They're only meant to function in areas where the Weirwood trees grow, and for the most part, they say those just exist in and around Westeros and on Dragonstone. It's all about the network of weirwoods that are all tied together in their root system underneath Westeros. Like all the weirwoods across Westeros from north to south, from east to west, are connected through their underground root system. At least in the books, when they get into this, the idea is that Bran Stark can see the past from any of the weirwoods' perspectives. So, like, if a weirwood exists somewhere, he can see the past in and around proximity to that particular weirwood tree. And I think the idea is that there aren't any weirwoods growing west of Westeros or on the eastern continent or even the southern continent, which we actually know a little bit more about. In order for that to work, the Weirwood network, like the roots, would have to grow underneath all the seas. And I don't think the Weirwood network is that vast. Like, yes, he is OP, but he's not that OP. Like, he can't see every single thing across the entire world all at the same time. So the reason why he probably didn't say anything here when Arya said she was going west of Westeros is because he didn't know what was west of Westeros. When it comes to that Tourney at Harrenhal production, they said that that's supposed to be on the West End in London. It's a stage play version, but it's just about that part of the story in and around the tourney itself. So like Rhaegar Targaryen meeting Lyanna Stark for the first time as the Knight of the Laughing Tree, what happened after that, and the other major characters involved in and around the tourney itself. Most of the time when people talk about the tourney at Harrenhal, they're just talking about Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark, and the Knight of the Laughing Tree, but there's a lot of other stuff that happened there, and there are a lot of other reasons canonically why the tourney itself was important to history. Recently, HBO also confirmed the Game of Thrones movie. It sounds like they confirmed my theory too. It won't actually see it for at least 3 to 4 years at the earliest, meaning the main House of the Dragon show will be done, like season 4 will be done. Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will either be done or in its final season. Also meaning that the movie will probably happen around the time we started to get episodes of the Aegon's Conquest TV series that they just started working on. But everyone post all your reactions in the comments below. They do the Arya Stark sequel series. What do you want to see them do during those episodes? Just seems like the biggest slam dunk for all the sequel story ideas that they have. I just did a big Game of Thrones movie video. Click here to learn all about that, and click here for that Knight of the Seven Kingdoms trailer video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.